Thank you for watching the Hopetown podcast. My name is Chris. I'm the program coordinator here at Hopetown. And for today's very first episode, I'm excited to welcome Ted St. John, our CEO. Hey, Ted.
Hello.
So, obviously, I'm pretty excited about this podcast. But what does this really mean to you?
Well, I mean, think about it. We've been doing social media for a long time. We've had a million different milestones, and we've covered them all, or I try to cover them all. I do it with some pictures generally and a caption. I've always felt like, there's a smaller percentage of people who want to know more, but it's hard to convey it. So I thought video eventually. So I'm glad you're here and can set this type of thing up, because I think it's something that we want to build on. I think video with what we're doing is necessary going forward to really help better.
Yeah. So let's dive right in.
Okay.
I want to talk about you a little bit.
Okay.
I want to talk about really starting with your recovery. What does recovery look like for you? And give us a little bit of some backstory that would explain kind of how you got from where you were to where you are now.
Okay. Well, to be doing the services in my hometown where I'm fifth generation, resident of Wyndham, I think has a lot to do with the story that we're telling, especially with what we're doing now. But I grew up in this town, and, I've got a couple generations of St. John's who, my dad, his story was he was about 10, and my grandfather went to get milk, and he didn't see him for 15 years. That's real. My story was I was about 10, and my dad split, and he became homeless for the next 15 years, and we didn't have social media, and I didn't have much contact at all. So I kind of grew up in this town angry, but people don't like angry, right? Our society says you're not really supposed to be or show anger. Yeah. So I didn't know what I was feeling. I was angry, but really I wasn't angry. I was confused. I was sad. I was embarrassed. I was afraid a lot. I was also afraid of what would become of me. So I made some declarations that, I was going to break the cycle of the St. John men, right? Long story short, I became the cycle.
How'd that cycle start for you?
Well, I found relief in using. I found relief in alcohol and drugs. I found relief in fighting. I found relief in risk, anything that had risk.
And specifically relief from what?
Pain.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was really uncomfortable. But I was in pain. I was in a lot of pain. I couldn't describe it. That's what it felt like. And so when I used, or I did something that had a lot of risk to it, I felt better. Mm-hmm. And so I tried to figure out how I can do more of that.
Yeah, so, I would imagine pretty quickly that risky behavior, the using, developed into something deeper, right?
Yeah, so I had to really manage alcohol, because alcohol and me, it was really obvious, and I got consequences. So drugs were less detectable. I could seem to be a little more stable. So, I kind of tried to balance that as best I could. That said, I knew I needed discipline. I knew I was in trouble. I knew I was at risk to really end up in jail or worse, right? So I decided I was going to go in the military and get some discipline, which I did. I did pretty well in the military, but I had a lot of alcohol-related incidents, and I left the military with an honorable discharge. I enjoyed my experience there, but to stay in longer, I was at risk because I drank too much.
Yeah.
So I got out, and I started a career in personal training. I went into bodybuilding, which is powerlifting, and
which you couldn't tell by looking at you now.
Well, it was something that helped me, right?
Yeah.
It was something that gave me structure. And so I followed that. And I think I competed until I was about 30. Yeah. And I could manage and control the alcohol and the drugs and the uppers and the downers. But, a couple years after I stopped competing in bodybuilding, I was hopelessly addicted to Oxycontin and Xanax. And, I was selling steel. I was making six-figure income. I had Zoe right around the time that I started using Oxycontin, and that quickly took me over. So by the time she was 1, I was already completely, hopelessly addicted to it. Turned into a $200 a day habit. I managed that for best I could. It didn't take long before, she was coming up, and I would tell people she was the most important thing. And to me, she was, but she really wasn't, because really I had to get fixed in order to be able to function. So, oxygen, Oxycontin, then it was my daughter or my family and, anything else.
At what point do you think, at what point do you think that changed for you? Like, when did your priority shift from Zoe being lower down on that list to her being up at the top?
Well, in the end of '08, the banks collapsed. And I knew I was in trouble because I knew I wasn't going to be able to go pull $200 a day out of my ATM. All our steel orders stopped. So I knew something outside of my house of cards was going to blow it up. And I had to have it. I was a slave to it. There's no delay. I mean, anytime that I was delayed of opiates, I would go into withdrawal. And I've been in withdrawal hundreds of times, various degrees of it. But I never got through it, right? I never got through and out. But I was using one time, driving down the road, using on a CD cover, snorting off of a CD cover while I'm driving, and Zoe in the back of my car. And at one point, she was just under 4 years old, and she goes, "Dad." And it was this tone, like with urgency and fear. And I looked into the rearview mirror, and she's just looking at me with this face. She didn't say anything else. But what I internalized it was, something's wrong. I'm watching you, Dad, and it's not okay. Something's wrong. That's not right, what she was seeing. And it grabbed me. It grabbed me pretty good. I was calling for treatment after that. And I went to Glen Bay. I took an FMLA from work. I didn't tell anybody what was wrong with me. Nobody really knew. They knew something was very wrong with me, but they didn't know exactly what. I've also got stage 4 non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, so I let people believe that it was cancer. It sure looked like it. My organs were shutting down. I was gray. I wasn't going to see 40 years old, or I wasn't going to see much past 40 years old without something changing. So, on February 19th of 2009, I put myself into treatment. I used for a couple days straight, put myself into treatment. And, the short story is I haven't used yet. I haven't picked up anything since then. I stopped using all mood or mind-altering substances, alcohol, drugs, everything. On February 20th, I had a full day clean, and it took me about a year to feel human again.
So I want to talk about Zoe a little bit. But before we do, can you tell me what those early days of recovery looked like for you?
Yeah.
The first couple days you're in Glen Bay,
Yeah,
what did
so
that look like?
it wasn't so bad. It wasn't so bad because they had me on some medication, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, this is going to be okay, I remember leaving there, and they were telling me I needed to stay, and I was like, no, I'm here. I'm leaving. And I still have relationships with those folks that tried to stop me from leaving. but I didn't that day. But after I left, I was raw. I felt like an alien. I felt brittle. I felt hollow inside, like I had a brittle shell. Like physically, it took months for me to feel mostly normal at times. But then you go into this emotional withdrawal where just raw, just completely raw. My emotional stability was way off. But for the first time in my life, I was around people. I'd heard that alcoholics stopped drinking. I didn't know any drug addicts that stopped using. So when I started meeting some, there was some hope transferred there, right? So they just kept saying, just try to get through dinner, man. Just try to shrink it down just for today. Just try to get through today. So I started counting days pretty quick and suffering a lot. But there was something inside me deep that knew that what the experience that others were sharing with me was real. And that if it's possible to not use anything and be okay with that, then it was my obligation. It was my responsibility, if it was possible. Because honestly, I went into this and I didn't know that it was even possible for someone like me to not use and be okay with that.
Yeah. So let's talk about Zoe for a second.
Okay.
I know just from my interactions with her, as well as our conversations about her, like she has obviously played and continues to play a huge part in your recovery. I have a daughter myself, 2.5 years old. And so like when I look at her, I just think, man, I want to be the best father, husband, I want to be the best man I can possibly be. And I want to do it for her.
Yeah.
And so, going through recovery, especially those early days, what about Zoe? Was she something that you held on to in those moments of like, oh man, I don't know if I'm going to make it?
Yeah.
Like, talk to me about what she means to you and how she has influenced your recovery.
Well, I've said this before because it's true and it's my story, is I was full of apathy. I didn't really care if I lived. I didn't want to keep repeating what was happening with me. I'd gotten past the point where I felt like I was able to really return normally at all. But I was suicidal. I had a plan and I had means, and I spent a lot of time thinking about it. And there was, in those moments when I was at my weakest, when it was at its strongest, to just say, just be done. Just be done. I would think of what it was like for me as a kid to have a narrative of a dad who was absent, homeless, schizophrenic. It was difficult for me. I didn't want her narrative to be, oh, I'm so sorry about your dad. He was a good guy, but boy, he sure couldn't. It really took him, didn't it? And I didn't want her to have that. So I think that was what when it was at its strongest and I was at my weakest, that was what was sitting there with me. So when I felt it was possible, I got excited, honestly, even though it was really difficult. I was excited because I felt like I was going to do something significant. That's really what I wanted to do. I wanted her to be proud. I remember having a week clean, and my sponsor, Jim Beadle, he showed up at a meeting with his daughter, one of his kids. She was 18 years old, redhead, Sabrina. And he was going to tell his story. And I listened to him tell his story, but I didn't really watch him. I watched her. And he was pretty raw. He was telling it like it was, right? From something that was 20 years earlier when she was, before she was there. She knows him. She knew him the way she knew him in recovery. And he was there for everything, present and available. she watched him. I wanted Zoe to see me that way. I didn't want her to see me the way I saw my dad. So that's what I worked towards. And honestly, for a guy like me, just not picking up, that was something to be proud of, because it's difficult. And I wanted to show her that we can do difficult things. You know, I mean, I'd done a lot of other things in my life that were difficult, and I was proud of those things. This had me, and I didn't want to be had by it.
Yeah.
I wanted her to see that, you know, we can be honest with people. We can share who we are. We can share our weaknesses with people. Actually, it actually makes us stronger to be able to do that. That's what I learned in recovery early on. So I started practicing that. And, you know, I knew it would take some time for it to come full circle. But, you know, she was 4 when I came into recovery. She's 20. She's proud of her dad.
Yeah, I can tell.
And her dad is proud of her. And we've come through it. We've come through a lot. And we've always been in step with each other. I've learned through my recovery to accept her where she's at. And she's learned to accept me and all that comes with that. But she's, I mean, she knows what recovery's done for our family. She knows what it's done for her. I mean, she got my clean date tattooed on the back of her neck as her first tattoo.
Yeah, it's huge.
That meant something to her. She knows what it means. She knows how it changed her life.
Yeah.
She knows that she had some other friends who she grew up with who their parents didn't get or stay in recovery, and their life was a lot different. You know,
Yeah.
when she looks at me, she can trust what she sees. And that's really what I want most.
Yeah, and I'm excited. Hopefully we'll have her on here soon.
Yeah, I think that'd be
Ask
cool.
her some questions about you and get the tea, you know.
She's got stuff to say.
Yeah.
But I think it's good that we talk to people in recovery, because we always talk to people like me who's in recovery, what it's like. You know, I think we should be talking to the families.
Yeah.
Find out what it's like. Not families that are wishing their family would be in recovery, but families who their family is in recovery, what it's like for them, how it's impacted their life.
Yeah.
Not just the fact that I've been clean. What has that example been like for her, generally speaking, not just specific to drugs
Yeah.
and alcohol?
Yeah. One other person I want to talk about, you mentioned Jim Beadle a
Yeah.
couple of moments ago. Tell me about Jim and the significance he had in your life, and kind of how he still influences you in your recovery today.
Yeah, so Jim passed a few months ago. He had a double lung transplant, and he outlived that expectancy and then some. Jim Beadle was somebody that, you know, I came out of the treatment and I went into the rooms, and I went in there with the sticky note solution, which is find a sponsor, pick a home group, work steps, right? Go to meetings. So I remember my first few meetings, I was listening to people, and he happened to be at a meeting in Kent, my second meeting in, and just the gratitude that he had. He was rough around the edges. I was thinking, I'm going to have to tell whoever this mentor is going to be some secrets about me. I'm going to have to be honest with him. So I kind of was looking for a specific type of person, but I needed somebody who gave a shit. And he gave a shit. What it turned out to be for me was so much more than I expected, because typically a sponsor is just a person who helps take you through the step process. There's a lot of expectations as to what a sponsor is, but that's essentially what it is. But for me, I was looking for a father figure my whole life. I was chasing a dad. And Vito became that. You know, he's probably only 10 years older than me. But he'd been through so much. And he cared so much about me. I never had a man really, truly care about me. Not say I care about you, but demonstrate it through his actions. He demonstrated that shit. And for a kid like me, a guy like me, that loyalty is going to run deep for somebody who cares about me. And he did. And he cared enough to be honest with me. He cared enough to be honest with me about me, how he experienced me and my arrogance. And because he cared so much, I was willing to accept it. And it made all the difference. Because my arrogance wasn't really truly arrogance. I didn't think I was better than anybody. I felt less than. And I thought the solution was to feel better than. It just made sense that way, that I would be better. I would feel better if I could just not feel less than. And it turns out humility is feeling the same as, being able to identify with people and find a connection at an equal level rather than a lower or higher level. And that came out through the step work and the efforts that we put in. And that's something that he and I identified with pretty closely, and it solved a lot of problems for us. And it helps me today to solve a lot of problems because I either have a tendency to feel less than or feel better than. But I can solve that problem by feeling same as.
Yeah.
It's a big life lesson for me, and it helps me a lot.
Yeah. He's, from the way you talk about him, I never met him, but he seems like someone that lived his life in such a way that I would want to emulate that, so how has the way Jim Beadle lived his life affected the way that you live your life now?
So Beadle told me early on, all I got to do is bring the want to, right? Mm-hmm. I got to be willing. I don't have to know anything. I don't have to do much. I just got to be willing, right? Beadle was more willing to help people than I'll ever be.
Yeah.
There's something about it for him that he just would help no matter what. He was so selfless. He gave to his family the same way he gave to anybody that needed his help. People that didn't need his help, he was trying to help. Mm-hmm. I would find myself not being the same selflessness to his degree. But I had different skill sets, and I had to learn to utilize those. So I think that's kind of what helped me go into, staying in recovery was being willing to help. Mm-hmm. He used to say to me, somebody would ask me to sponsor him. I had like 90 days clean. I'm calling him going, I can't sponsor anybody. I don't know anything. He's like, are you a step ahead of him? I'm like, yeah. He goes, then who the hell are you to not help a suffering addict? And I'm like, yeah, but there's so many people that are better than, that know more, that can be more helpful. He goes, but they asked you. Mm-hmm. What am I going to say? The man was always there. He always told me how he felt about me, all the way up to the last conversation, and he demonstrated it. And that means a lot. But he lived his life by being, the dude was all over the place, man. Yeah, he was a hyperspaz.
Yeah. But
you knew who he was. He was honest, and he shared his experience. What are you going to do? I mean, he's authentic. Authenticity, man. That dude, you knew who he was, and you knew what he stood for, and you knew what you were going to get with him. And if he could help, he would. And that's what I loved about him.
So as you kind of reflect back, like Jim, Zoe, all these different people, there's tons of different people throughout your life that have affected you, and those interactions with those people have led you to where you are now. So let's talk a little bit about like what's going on now in life. What's not just your own personal recovery, but here at Hopetown. Give us a general overview of for those that have never heard of Hopetown, or want to know more about our recovery ecosystem. What do we got going on here?
Yeah, so I think that there's a lot to be said. I've worked for the last 15 or so years in treatment and recovery. A lot of the first 10 years of that was in treatment. primarily. And there's a big place for it. There's a big need for the intervention, the point at which a person stops using and chooses something different. But it's a short period, right? And I think there's a lot of energy put into that space. A lot of funding, a lot of resource goes into that first 60, 90 days. With good reason. It's a lot to shift. But what I noticed, because I'm a recovery guy, and my experience is how recovery helped me. And recovery is not clinical. It's basic. It's principles, right? So honesty, open-mindedness, willingness, being self-honest. And in order to do those things, there's big question marks that come up when we shift and we try to figure out that we're going to actually try to use without substance or try to live without substance. Financial and relationships are big things that come right into play, right? Like, what will become of me? What will become of my finances? What will become of my relationships? I'm getting a lot of conflicting information about the priorities that need to be had. I've been ignoring most of my priorities because I've had this big addiction to feed, right? And now that it's tabled, I need to go fix a bunch of stuff. But people in recovery are saying I need to slow down a little bit and work on my inside so that I could sustain this. Well, that means I got to figure out basic things in order to be able to do that. I got to figure out my relationships, my finances, my house, and that includes housing, transportation, and employment. Those are big things. In addition to that, I've got these big relationships in my life. Now, I'm talking about me, but I'm talking about those that I serve, that we serve, right? So for me, we built Hopetown as a nonprofit because it made sense to do that, to make it a nonprofit. But we built it on, some big pillars like housing, transportation, employment, recovery, peer support services, linkage and navigation, helping a person navigate through that, not just as a peer supporter or as a sponsor or as a mentor, but as somebody who understands and can help link and navigate complex financial and relationship issues, right? And we got an office in the county jail. We have for 5-6 years. We do help with reentry. But really, our whole program here is about employment, transportation, and housing, wrapped up in peer support. We have a social model that's peer-led all the way through.
Yeah. So how do you think, in what ways does Hopetown stand out from other types of recovery services that are offered?
Well, I'm not sure. I don't know how we compare or stand out. I think when you say something like that, though, I think we're comprehensive, right? So we're handling the big pieces. So if a person comes to us, that's why we call it an ecosystem, right? Because really all of your needs can be met. Not necessarily your wants, not what the self or the ego wants, but the needs can be met while we metamorphosize, right? You don't need clothes or food or a job, and you don't need. All you got to bring is the want to, man. Like that's as simple as it comes. But you got to keep deciding that, and that's gonna mean some introspection. That's gonna mean taking away what I want, taking away my ego, just for today, right? And doing some work on me and showing some faith, demonstrating some faith that this might not satisfy my ego and my fear right now, that I've got to get it all back and I've got to do it. I might need to throw my hands up and say, you know what? For a little bit, just for today, I'm going to take some suggestions. And I'm going to try to do something that I haven't done. And I'm going to try to stay open so that tomorrow I'm going to try to make that decision again. And I'm going to fight with it. I'm going to wrestle with it. And I'm not going to want to. but I'm going to try to put myself in a position to where I can do it anyway. Because I've been serving, what do they say? If my best ideas got me here.
Yeah.
Right. So I ended up in the same position. I needed to take suggestions from people, and I needed to go against the grain financially and otherwise from what was reasonable or rational for me. I was making six figures even through the depths, the hardest parts of my addiction. I was still functioning. It was a house of cards, but I was still functioning. I gave up all that. And even my family said, dude, would you join a cult, man? I mean, because you still got some personal responsibilities. And I'm like, I know, but I think that's going to destroy me if I don't do this first. And slowly I was able to build back up. And everything kind of worked out.
Yeah, so Hopetown obviously offers a lot of different services. Like you said, housing, transportation. What are some of the things that are next for Hopetown that get you the most excited?
We talk about the core of Hopetown. What's really exciting for me and has been for the last couple of years is, I'm an entrepreneur. I've worked in business or around business for all of my adult life since I got out of the military. I look at this, when I first heard the term social enterprise, I'm like, what is that? Well, it seemed like it was a business that you could build within a business for a nonprofit. I'm like, how does that work? Well, you build a business, you run a business, and the proceeds go to help the nonprofit. Oh, so it's not just grants and people,
donating money.
Yeah. Like we can actually use the vehicle, the model of a nonprofit, and create a business that actually serves our residents or the people that we serve. So our first one was Hope on Wheels, that came about by a house manager who still drives for us today, Hope on Wheels. It was his idea. He suggested that I get contracted to drive for Medicaid rides. And long story short, I resisted for a while and finally it clicked and we got contracted. And originally we did it to be able to get reimbursed to move our own residents to their medical appointments, including treatment. And that way we could at least help them and get money to do it. Even if it was just going to pay for the service and not, because transportation's expensive. It quickly turned into a business to where we do 1,000 rides a month for our community. Less than 50 of those rides are for people that live in our house, and we created those proceeds that we create revenue to provide all those rides. That's quite an operation. Try giving 10 rides a month or 1,000, it's quite an operation. And we got 12 cars, a lot of people focused to make that happen. But we were profitable, and we take those profits and we put it towards staffing that goes towards the programs that serve the people that we set out to serve. It also created a business model that allowed me to buy this building, the old police department and fire station.
Yeah.
We don't buy that with grants because banks don't like grants because grants aren't guaranteed next year. So you can't prove that income, but you could prove Hope on Wheels income. So that social enterprise, that's why it became exciting to me. It allowed us to become more autonomous. It allowed us to actually figuratively and literally put a motor on a model that had none, right? When you look at recovery housing, the model of $450 rent, that might work if it's just me that's going to serve that group of 15 guys. That might allow me to make barely a modest income and not work, and I can just help them. Or I could have a team of 25 staff serve this population because we've actually grown it to be more, What started making sense for us when you got 12 cars and you're driving 5,000 miles a month per car, you're putting 40, 50,000 miles on 10, 12 cars a month. You get a lot of wear parts go out quick. You're doing oil changes every 3 or 4 weeks. You're changing brakes every 3 or 4 months, right?
Yeah. Tires.
You're just running the wheels off these cars, right? AC units. We do, if we got 10 cars, we're doing 3 or 4 AC units every spring, right? As soon as it gets hot, we're like, oh, shoot, here we go. So we started realizing we were spending a lot of money just in regular wear parts, let alone repair, just in maintenance. So naturally, taking care of our own fleet, we could hire qualified people that we serve to work for us and become part of us. And that was the idea of fixing up this old fire station and making a public garage out of it. We, one, take care of our own cars. Two, we opened, 3 weeks ago to the public. And this community has no auto shop in town, so they're finding it pretty helpful. And we've got a 3-bay garage in the back that we're going to do detailing out of when it's not freezing out. But in the time being, we can at least clean out our own cars and wash them down.
Yeah.
So that they're not looking terrible through the winter.
Yeah. So the social enterprise thing has...
Social
really
enterprise to me is like the most exciting part of what I do.
Yeah. Yeah, it's super exciting. I constantly will have ideas come across my head as I'm sitting at my desk working on something, thinking like, oh, we could do this or we could do this. And so I'm excited to see where the future...
Well, and one of our programs it became Hopetown Solutions, right?
Yeah.
It started with the transportation solutions because we were doing some innovation challenges and getting some recognition for this Hope on Wheels idea, right? And what it's done for our organization financially and otherwise and who it serves, right? All the communities are looking to solve transportation issues, not just people in recovery, right? We just happen to be in recovery and we're solving this, at least for ourselves. And our community, at least a part of it. So now we're licensing our brand, Hope on Wheels brand.
Down in Cincinnati.
And that'll be our first licensing agreement. Technical assistance to help them build a transportation program, ongoing coaching and mentoring. And we bill like we're accountant, like my accountant does or my lawyer does. We bill for the time that we spend helping them. And it makes total sense. And I wish we'd have had that available to us when we started.
Yeah.
Because it
save a lot of headache.
We're not building, they're not going to be building from scratch. They're going to be building from experience.
Yeah. And then we're going to be able to incorporate into Hopetown Solutions our AI softwares. Which is really cool.
What you and I spend most of our time talking about.
Yeah, and I won't get you going too deep into it because I know this will be a 2-hour podcast if we do. But
we'll do another one.
The whole idea is, we created this chatbot for the website because we were like, well, we want something that is 24/7 that can answer specific questions about Hopetown's services and general recovery questions if needed. And we didn't find that out till later, by the way. We were like, hey, I wonder what happens if we feeded the NA basic text, and then we did. And so this whole thing with our chatbot,
it's the breakthrough of the technology that's made it so available. This generative large language model AI has changed everything this year. So it's not just those little chatbots that you used to see that were very limited, narrow intelligence. This is good general intelligence that really can help you navigate all of, in a conversational prompt, all of the different services that we offer here. Even when people are saying, hey, I need, housing. And so it'll lead them to the right place and give them the right information. And then they're like, well, I'm not very good at doing it that way. And so then it redirects and it leads them to the linkage and navigation so that they can help them actually go in and apply for what they originally called for. And in the meantime, where we'd always been getting those calls, those Facebook messages at 7 p.m. on a Friday night after a long week, man, it is hard on my staff if we never, ever get a chance to take a moment and not help somebody. And when we see that it's actually able to help people better than we can, quicker, that's when we think we're on to something.
Yeah. So I'm excited to be able to teach that too. And
we'll be helping organizations set up AI so that they can. AI is not going, I say this regularly, almost every day now, AI is not going to replace you. AI is going to replace you with someone who can leverage AI, right? So if you can learn to leverage AI, you're good. You're golden. Doesn't matter what changes. You're golden. So every organization is going to need to further include it and make adjustments for it in order to be reasonable and compete.
Yeah.
To be effective.
And people like you and I can nerd out and talk about it, and it's exciting.
It's going to get really weird next year.
We'll have Tesla robots walking around
We
here
will.
pretty soon.
We'll be the first ones in Wyndham with
Yep.
humanoids.
Yep. So the last thing I want to talk about, we recently have spent the last month or so working on something called a manifesto. Talk to me about what led you to.
Yeah, so I think just the term manifesto, I never really thought applied to an organization, but then I realized that it does. It's actually, a manifesto is for a nonprofit like ours, it's a public declaration of our intentions and our values, right? Now, oftentimes I see, we got a mission statement, we got a vision statement, we talk about what our values are, core values, but this goes a little further into, if you are going to be served by us, if you're going to work for us or with us, what's that going to be like? And I think a manifesto starts to tell you what it's going to be like working with us.
Yeah. And so I've read over this quite a few times, and I've looked at it from the perspective of like, okay, if I'm someone new to my recovery, what can I expect? If I'm someone that's going to be starting to work, I'm someone that's going to start to work at Hopetown.
Yeah.
What can I expect? What's the environment going to be there? And I a couple of these things that are really cool to me, and I'll encourage anybody that hasn't seen this to get on our website, get on Facebook.
You should include it with the video.
Yeah, I will.
As an attachment or something.
A couple of the things on here, our enemy. Our enemy is the status quo. We confront internalized shame, public stigma, and outdated systems that hinder progress.
Yeah, that's our enemy. That is what we get up and fight every day.
Yeah.
So we do that in different ways. But as an organization, we need to have an enemy. We need to have a mission. Like we talk about a mission, we should have some energy behind that.
Yeah.
Our energy is our enemy is the status quo.
Yeah. And so here's something that motivates us, our core values. I'll list a couple of these. Gratitude, it says it's our greatest tool and most effective coping mechanism. Innovation, we create new solutions and opportunities. Honesty, we operate with transparency, authenticity, and trust, and drive. Persistence, perseverance, and passion. Why do you think those are so important?
Well, everything you just listed to me sounds like us, right?
Yeah.
It's stuff that we talk about every day. I identify with it personally. These are values for me, but it's not just, we're just not listing core values. We're describing what that means. So when you say, honesty, we're describing what that means to us, right? Accountability. Everybody has a part in this. We talk about that all the time in recovery. Who are we to judge if we don't have a part to play? Right? If we can only see your part in things and don't acknowledge our own part, me as a leader, as an administrator of this organization, I regularly share with what my part is in the problem. I'm going to help you identify and show you what I'm seeing, but it's not for me to do it the way I've seen it done at times, where people point out your development, the rough edges that you need to develop, right? But don't acknowledge their own, right? I should be able to point that out to you, but not acknowledge that I've also struggled with that, or I've struggled with something different, because that's how I learned in recovery. That's the only way I learned in recovery. So a lot of this manifesto, these core values and the description of them is important, because it's kind of how we all got here.
Well, something I don't think I've vocalized this before, but something I realized about this manifesto is that, like, Hopetown's a really unique place to work in my experience. Like, I've never worked at a place that operates in the way that Hopetown does. And it's because of the way that the people operate, like everyone here, like this manifesto isn't meant to say, hey, this is how you should operate. What I'm realizing is that this manifesto was created out of the way Hopetown and its employees already operate.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
why we passed this around to everybody
right.
and said, hey, make some edits and change it.
Yeah, this didn't just come from me. This is something I put out
Yeah.
and wanted the feedback on it, because this is fluid and it'll change. At
Yeah.
times maybe annually or however often, we're going to go back in and see if this is still us and what needs to be added. Read that passage on vulnerability, because honestly,
Yeah, I will.
this was your suggestion, and I didn't expect it to be what it is, but it really is who we are.
Yeah. Yeah. So the power of vulnerability. We recognize vulnerability as a strength that fosters authentic connection, healing, and growth. By embracing our imperfections and sharing our struggles, we create an environment where others feel safe to do the same. That's huge, I think. Vulnerability is the foundation of trust and transformation. It empowers us to break free from shame, build meaningful relationships, and discover resilience. At Hopetown, we champion courage through vulnerability, knowing it is essential to lasting recovery and collective progress.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, so that's me, right?
Yeah.
That's Jim Beadle. That's who Jim Beadle was, and that's who I modeled, because that vulnerability gave me freedom. So there's been times when people have said that I've shared maybe too transparently, and maybe not at the right time, and I'm sure that's certainly true for them. And maybe it's not always been in my best interest, right? But I haven't picked up, right?
Yeah.
I haven't broken anything lately, and I don't have any secrets. I mean, I had my first 3 to 5 years in recovery. I still had secrets. I still had sneaky behavior. I don't even have secrets anymore.
Yeah.
So for me to get free from that stuff, I'll take a little bit of oversharing.
Sure.
I'll take a little bit of, wow, Ted's he's a lot. At times, the way that he shares about himself and his life, I'll take that, because I don't have secrets, and I'm not wrecking myself today.
Yeah.
And I'm just trying to survive, and this is the best version of me I've ever been, and I take it or leave it. I'm still working at it.
Yeah.
But this is as good as it's been for me.
Yeah. So what are some final thoughts to anybody that's in a place where they're struggling right now, where they're either actively in their addiction, maybe they're just newly sober and they just don't have hope? What's one word of encouragement you would have for those people before we go today?
Yeah. So, a couple thoughts. One is, it's certainly possible, and if we're comparing what we're feeling inside to what we see on the outsides of others, we're fucked, right? So whatever we think we're perceiving in ourselves, in our own progress, in our own failures, as we perceive it compared to what we see on the outsides of others, we need to get some help. We need to find somebody to talk to that's got some experience, because they're going to help us put that into perspective, because that's false. Whatever that view is, that's false. We got to compare our insides to the insides of others who have been in this space, and what have they done? And so it's just taking the suggestions from others who have been through something like this. And my suggestion is, be honest. Open your mind just enough to be able to accept a new belief, and
take some suggestions,
and stop talking about what your beliefs are. Just stop talking about it. Just be open to whatever ideas are presented from people who have been through it. I always like to be around God-centered people. They're connected on some level to a higher power. Man, I'm down with those folks, because those guys are going to make some good suggestions.
Yeah.
Hopefully based on their experience.
Yeah. Well, thanks for all that you had to share, Ted. I almost called you Ched.
It's all right.
That's going to be your new nickname now. That's what I'm going to call you from now on. Anyway, thanks, man.
You bet.
Thanks for tuning into the Hopetown podcast. We hope you enjoyed, found something inspirational. For more information on Hopetown, you can visit hopetownohio.org. We'll see you next time.
Right on.